Hello and welcome back. In this part, we're going to look into a few points on why PyTorch. You've already decided to learn PyTorch, and you probably have heard that it's a very famous framework. Why should you learn PyTorch at this particular moment? First of all, PyTorch is very easy to learn. And you're going to see this as we move along. The concepts in PyTorch are easy to understand. It was developed with this in mind, and it has a very Python way of doing things. So if you're familiar with Python, if you've been coding with Python for a long time, then PyTorch is going to be very simple. And even if you have not been coding with Python for a long time, then PyTorch is still a very simple framework to learn. The other thing is that PyTorch is very fast and very flexible. Now, what I mean by this is with deep learning, we want to be able to do things fast because deep learning in general is a very fast-moving field. And we want to be able to prototype and test our systems and work around things in a very quick way. So PyTorch gives us this ability to do that. It's very fast and it's very flexible. Go to the PyTorch website, and under the documentation here, if you go to PyTorch, you will see this API here that is very detailed and well documented. Now, one of the things I like about this is how easy it is to modify any of these things that are available here. So for example, let's just start with torch.nn, and you can see the building blocks for graphs here, which is the main module that we're going to be using. So you can see containers, convolutional layers, and whatnot. You're going to be hearing a lot about this. But let's say, for instance, you wanted to know a little bit more about convolutional layers. You could essentially click on any of that and see some of the different layers that are supported in PyTorch. And when you go to any of those layers, then see how this class is actually implemented. Now, one of the things I really like to do is to click on this source here and see how this class is implemented. Now, if you study this class carefully, you realize that it's very easy to understand what's going on. And if you needed something extra that is not provided here, then it's very easy to add your own lines of code here and modify how PyTorch behaves. So that means it's very flexible to do things, and especially when you're dealing with things that are not necessarily supported in the main implementations that we have. You could do this with any of the other modules that is available. You could also create your own modules, and that would be very helpful. This becomes particularly important when you're dealing with data loading and whatnot. And the reason for that is because you're dealing with different types of data, and they don't always have a very similar way of loading that data into your model and getting to train that model. So sometimes you might need to do a few modifications on your data loaders, and of course PyTorch enables you to do that, and that becomes very handy. The other thing is that PyTorch is both great for research and production. A lot of people learned PyTorch mostly for research purposes, but recently PyTorch has become very prominent in production environments as well. And the reason for this, as I mentioned earlier, is that it's very fast and flexible. So a lot of companies are using PyTorch for production as well, and a lot of researchers, myself included, use PyTorch for research. So it's a great tool for both production and research. And finally, PyTorch has a very big and helpful community, and that means that whenever you get stuck, it's very easy to get help. Now let's look into where you would get help if you got stuck. Like I mentioned earlier, it's pretty normal to get stuck when dealing with PyTorch, and sometimes that can be very frustrating. For that reason, it's always good to know where to get help. Right? One of the places I like to go to when I need help is to go to the PyTorch community. And down here, you can see these PyTorch Discuss forums, where you can post any question, and you're most likely going to get someone to answer you. So for example, as you can see in this main page, there are people asking different kind of questions and expecting answers. Normally, the PyTorch community is very engaging, and you're very likely to get help within a very short time. I post questions here from time to time. All you have to do is create an account and log in, and you can post a question. And if you find a question that you can answer, then please feel free to answer and help somebody out. So this is kind of like my first point when I need help with PyTorch. Of course, the other place to get help is Stack Overflow. You probably already know about Stack Overflow and how it works and what you need to do. And you can see all sorts of questions about PyTorch here as well. So if you type, for example, PyTorch, you can see different questions from different people, and you can see the answers to some of these questions. Alternatively, you could just copy paste an error message that you're getting from PyTorch on Google, and most likely it's going to lead you either to Stack Overflow or to the PyTorch forums that we talked about earlier. So whichever way, you will get somebody to answer your question, and that is very helpful because it accelerates the speed at which you learn. Right? It's not good to get stuck for weeks. So whenever you get stuck, feel free to ask questions here on Stack Overflow or even on the PyTorch forums. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Just make sure your question is framed correctly. You don't want to ask very generic questions that are very, very hard to answer. You don't want to ask questions like, what's the best framework in deep learning, right? This is not the best place to ask those kind of questions. You want to be very specific when you're asking questions like, I have this particular error and it's happening because of this reason, and this is what's going on. So people will be able to take that and try it out on their own and kind of help you with that. Another very important thing to note is that whenever you're asking for help in both Stack Overflow and PyTorch, it's really important to mention the kind of environment that you're currently using. So you might want to mention the PyTorch version that you're using, your operating system, because some errors are not the same in for example, in Windows or in Linux. So make sure you're posting your questions with as many details as possible so that someone can easily help you. So with that in mind, now that we know where to get help, let's go into actually learning more about PyTorch.